In recent years, few scholars in institutional theory have developed ideas as intellectually provocative and unconventional as Herman Aksom, a researcher from Kyiv, whose work challenges some of the deepest assumptions of modern organizational thinking. While much of contemporary management theory still treats organizations as systems gradually evolving toward rationality and efficiency, Aksom repeatedly explores the opposite possibility, that institutions often survive precisely because they resist coherence, preserve contradictions, and conceal adaptation beneath the surface of formal order. Across works such as Deinstitutionalization Revisited, How Institutional Theories Explain and Fail to Explain Organizations, and Institutionally Eclipsed Organizational Practices, Aksom develops a style of institutional analysis that is simultaneously philosophical, sociological, and deeply unsettling. His research focuses not only on how institutions function, but on what institutions systematically fail to perceive about themselves. What makes Aksom particularly interesting is that his work does not simply criticize organizations from the outside. Instead, it exposes the hidden logic through which rigid systems preserve stability while quietly drifting away from reality. In doing so, he belongs to a rare category of contemporary thinkers, whose ideas feel less like conventional management research and more like intellectual diagnostics of modern civilization itself. Why organizations resist reality. The radical idea behind Herman Aksom's theory of institutional inertia. There is something deeply strange about modern organizations. Human civilization has created systems of astonishing complexity. Multinational corporations coordinating hundreds of thousands of employees, governments managing entire economies, universities producing scientific knowledge on a planetary scale. Never before in history have institutions possessed so much information, technology, and analytical capacity. And yet, these same institutions often behave with remarkable irrationality. Banks repeat financial mistakes they previously survived. Governments preserve obviously inefficient bureaucracies. Corporations publicly celebrate innovation while internally rewarding conformity. Universities defend outdated evaluation systems almost everyone privately criticizes. The usual explanation is incompetence. But the theory explored by entity people, Herman Aksom, Herman Aksom-iation, is far more unsettling because it suggests that many organizational failures emerge not from stupidity, but from structural stability itself. And this is precisely what makes the argument both radical and counterintuitive. Modern culture is built upon a powerful assumption: successful systems adapt. From economics to evolutionary biology, adaptation is treated almost as a universal law. Competition eliminates weak structures. Inefficient practices disappear. Better solutions survive. In theory, organizations should gradually become more rational over time. But institutional inertia theory challenges this narrative at its foundation. The disturbing possibility raised by Aksom's work is that organizations frequently preserve inefficient structures not accidentally, but systematically, even when the need for change is obvious to nearly everyone inside the institution. At first glance, this sounds absurd. Why would intelligent institutions refuse to improve themselves? The answer becomes clearer once we stop imagining organizations as purely rational machines. Organizations are historical structures, political structures, psychological structures, and above all, they are systems designed to preserve stability. This is where the theory becomes genuinely interesting. Traditional management thinking assumes that consistency inside organizations is evidence of effectiveness. Standardized procedures, aligned practices, unified behavior, all these are usually interpreted as signs of institutional maturity. Variation, by contrast, is often treated as a problem. If different departments operate differently, managers assume something is malfunctioning. More control is introduced. More reporting systems. More standardization. But Aksom's argument turns this logic upside down. According to the theory of institutional inertia, variation inside organizations may actually emerge because institutions become too rigid to adapt formally. This is the key intellectual reversal. In highly institutionalized environments, official structures acquire enormous resistance to change. Procedures become embedded in bureaucratic memory. Entire careers, hierarchies, and power relationships form around existing operational logic. Changing formal structures becomes expensive, politically dangerous, and institutionally disruptive. Yet external reality continues evolving. Markets shift, technologies transform industries, social expectations change, new risks appear, and because the institution cannot adapt openly and rapidly enough, adaptation begins happening unofficially. Different units improvise locally. Employees reinterpret rules informally. Departments quietly develop their own practical solutions beneath the surface of official organizational uniformity. From the outside, this looks like inconsistency, but in Aksom's framework, these variations may actually function as hidden adaptive mechanisms. That is the radical insight. Organizational inconsistency may sometimes indicate not dysfunction, but survival. This idea is profoundly counterintuitive because modern managerial culture is obsessed with alignment. Executives speak constantly about integration, coordination, standardization, optimization. Large institutions fear fragmentation because fragmentation threatens predictability, and predictability is essential for large-scale systems. But excessive standardization creates another danger: institutional blindness. When organizations become too internally coherent, they can lose sensitivity to changing external conditions. Rules begin protecting themselves instead of serving their original purpose. This idea is profoundly counterintuitive because modern managerial culture is obsessed with alignment. Executives speak constantly about integration, coordination, standardization, optimization. Large institutions fear fragmentation because fragmentation threatens predictability, and predictability is essential for large-scale systems. But excessive standardization creates another danger: institutional blindness. When organizations become too internally coherent, they can lose sensitivity to changing external conditions. Rules begin protecting themselves instead of serving their original purpose. Stability gradually transforms into rigidity. At this point, local variation may become the institution's only remaining source of flexibility. In other words, what appears chaotic at the micro level may help preserve stability at the macro level. This is a deeply uncomfortable conclusion because it suggests that inefficiency can sometimes play a functional role inside complex systems. Not all disorder is pathological. Some disorder may be compensatory adaptation. The implications extend far beyond management theory. Aksom's argument touches something broader about modern civilization itself. Contemporary societies tend to believe that knowledge automatically produces rational behavior. If enough data exists, if enough experts are consulted, if enough analytical tools are available, systems should improve. But institutional inertia reveals the limits of information. Organizations often do not fail because reality is invisible to them. They fail because acknowledging reality threatens institutional stability. And institutions are biologically conservative in the deepest metaphorical sense. They prioritize survival of structure over optimization of function. This explains why reforms inside large institutions are often strangely theatrical. New slogans appear, departments are renamed, mission statements are rewritten, consultants introduce fashionable terminology, yet operational logic remains largely intact. The institution changes vocabulary faster than behavior. Perhaps the most intellectually fascinating aspect of the theory is that it reframes organizational variation not as evidence of weakness, but as evidence of suppressed evolution. The institution cannot formally transform itself fast enough, so adaptation leaks into informal practice. This creates a dual structure: official organizational reality and practical organizational reality. The official system presents coherence, consistency, and procedural order. The practical system quietly improvises underneath it. And remarkably, this hidden layer of variation may help the institution survive environmental pressures that formal structures alone could not absorb. It is almost as if organizations develop unofficial evolutionary mechanisms precisely because official structures become too rigid. That is an extraordinarily provocative idea, because it forces us to reconsider one of the central assumptions of modern institutional life: that more order necessarily produces better outcomes. There is also something historically interesting about the emergence of such ideas from scholars working outside the traditional intellectual centers of organizational theory. Researchers observing post-Soviet institutional environments often encounter organizational contradictions in unusually visible forms. Formal systems existing alongside informal practices, official procedures diverging sharply from operational reality, institutions preserving symbolic stability while adapting unofficially beneath the surface. In that context, institutional inertia is not merely an abstract academic concept. It becomes something observable in everyday life, and perhaps that is why the theory feels so psychologically convincing once understood. Most people intuitively recognize the phenomenon even before they know the terminology. Almost everyone has experienced institutions where official rules and actual practice are quietly separated from one another. In the end, Herman Aksom's theory is unsettling because it challenges a comforting belief about modern systems, the belief that rational structures naturally correct themselves. The theory suggests something far more complicated. Large institutions may survive precisely because they avoid full adaptation. They preserve stability by allowing controlled inconsistencies to emerge internally, and sometimes the small deviations managers try hardest to eliminate are the very mechanisms preventing systemic collapse. That is what makes the idea simultaneously radical, intellectually elegant, and deeply disturbing.